Our military is under assault. Its history, its mission to protect us, its focus on winning wars. All of this is under attack. The battles in this war have been between America First conservatives and liberal Marxists who are turning our military into a social experiment with deadly consequences. There is no better example of this than Afghanistan 2021.
The Afghan National Army started setting down their rifles and walking away. They were slowly diminishing, and towards the end we had no help from the Afghan National Army. These guys already know what we're doing, how we're doing it. If they were to turn over to the Taliban or ISIS, these guys are most equipped to do some real damage to us. These could be the last moments of my life right now if these guys actually have a switch to blow this thing. The report that was getting passed was a vehicle-borne IED, improvised explosive device. But I was told to take a knee. That's when I started freaking out because that's pretty much just surrendering.
It's just like a standoff because there's a crowd of people in between us and the road. So it was kind of just a staring match. Like, is this thing gonna go off or what's gonna happen? It was that tense moment of like, the unknown.
Rules of engagement were a little bit foggy because we were there under the premise of a non-combative evacuation operation, which became combative immediately. We all kind of had a weird feeling. I remember walking around to my command element and being like, this is weird, I have an eerie feeling.
It's 8:52 here in New York. I'm Bryant Gumbel. We understand that there has been a plane crash on the southern tip of Manhattan. You're looking at the World Trade Center. We understand that a plane has crashed into the World Trade Center. We don't know anything more than that.
When 9/11 happened, Taylor was 11, and he watched that with us on TV. We kept him home from school that day, and he told his mom and I at the time, I'm going to be a Marine.
My son Jared was a fun, energetic kid who would wear me out on the daily. He was constantly on the go, always wanted to play ball, whether it was football, soccer, throwing the ball, hitting a ball, anything to do with a ball, he wanted to do it. So we did that all through his young years. I can remember like yesterday teaching him how to ride a bike in a parking lot.
Staff Sergeant Hoover, which is Taylor, my Taylor. Light of my life, my firstborn, my only son, my best friend, light up any room. He was a goofball, though. His guys wouldn't have thought that because he always was such a stern, I don't know, always training, always trying to make whoever he met better. But he was a goofball. He did impressions. Jim Carrey was the best one he did.
Él era un niño tan hermoso desde pequeño, travieso, hiperactivo. Siempre quería estar haciendo algo. Siempre le llamé mi niño de ojos verdes.
One of the first things that I remember about Jared was his shy but infectious smile. It lit up a room. He absolutely was, even though shy, literally the life of any get-together. He was very passionate about his stepbrother and his sisters. He played sports, loved playing soccer, loved to talk about playing hockey and basketball, and he literally was a friend to everybody. I don't think he knew a single stranger.
Growing up, he played a lot of sports and put his all into trying to make himself better.
So Nicole was my daughter-in-law. Her and my son went to high school together and found love early. with each other. They got engaged on the Oregon coast. I was lucky enough to be there for that.
I joined the Army to do something amazing for my country that generations of my family could be proud of. And I wanted to have looked my kids in the eye and said that I served when others wouldn't, because it was an institution that the American people needed to defend them.
We have a military that has deviated from the core mission of becoming lethal and survivable and capable, and instead they've drifted into the desire to create social justice warriors rather than the warriors necessary to protect and preserve our country.
I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States. So help me God.
Congratulations, Mr. President.
So I've had a wonderful career in terms of business, and I've had a lot of fun in life. I've done a lot of different things, but I ran for president, and there's just no feeling like it. And then when I won, it was something almost surreal. So much money had been spent in Afghanistan, so much money had been spent on these endless wars, these foolish, endless wars, started by people that didn't know what they were doing. They had their own reasons, but they were started by people that largely were not people that I respected greatly. And all the death, and I'm talking about death on both sides, all the destruction. You look at the Middle East, and we spent $9 trillion in the Middle East, and what did we do? We blew up the place. We got nothing out of it except death and destruction. And it just is hard to believe with Afghanistan. I've been complaining about that one for years. As a private, as a citizen, I've been complaining. And then when I became a politician, they started listening to my complaints a lot more, I would say.
They were spending $60 billion a year. Does that number sound familiar? You should. That's the Ukraine number. Just random. Remember, there's no coincidences. $60 billion a year in Afghanistan for nothing. And eventually, what President Trump would do is an ordered withdrawal over time with a negotiated deal. And that's exactly what we didn't get. These people look you right in the eye, and they will lie to you. And unless you've been there before, unless you're tough enough and smart enough to strip back their lies and pin them against the wall, you're just going to get played. They're in the business of playing. This is what the administrative state and the deep state are. They're in the business of running this deal. And they don't quite frankly care what you have to say, and they particularly could care less about what an America First Commander-in-Chief has to say.
So I know the military maybe better than anybody because I rebuilt our military. We had 48-year-old fighter jets. We had 80-year-old bombers. We had planes that were they give the analogy that the young grandson is now flying a plane that the grandfather flew many years ago. And we had, it's just crazy. We had planes that were so old and decrepit. We rebuilt our entire military, every aspect of it, spent a lot of money, but we upgraded it and substantially built it. It was rebuilt it. It was new. I said, don't go to Iraq, but if you do, keep the oil. Well, Iraq has over $300 billion now in oil funds. They make a lot of money with oil, and sadly, it's become a subsidiary. By having destroyed the military of Iraq, it's become a subsidiary of Iran. Iran is calling the shots in Iraq.
Number one, we are going to destroy ISIS. You got to go back to 2016 when we were running. What Obama and the folks around him had said is that, oh, this is a generational thing. It's going to take generations to take care of ISIS.
I want to start by repeating what I've said since the beginning. This will not be quick.
President Obama says it is time to turn the page on more than a decade of war.
Now, what was ISIS? ISIS was a Islamic jihad, a caliphate. The caliphate at the time of President Trump's victory, the caliphate, the physical caliphate, not just their reach around the world, but the physical caliphate, taking parts of Syria and Kurdistan and Iraq. It was larger and a more functional government than the government of Iraq at the time. I would argue the government in Syria at the time. It had oil revenues. It was taxing people. This was growing. It was attracting not simply people from the United States, but huge amounts of people, young people, jihadis, many of whom were not Muslim, to convert them and then turn them into warriors. So the caliphate was a physical entity that had put fear into the Western democracies. Obama said, this will be generational for us to take it down. President Trump said, hey, how about this? Suck on this. This is what we're going to do. We're going to make it a #1 priority, and we're going to take it down immediately.
Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi is dead.
We are learning more information about the raid that took down ISIS leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi.
Travel ban wasn't to single out Islamic nations or single out Muslims. It was to make sure that the terrorism that had run riot under the Obama administration was stopped 100%. President Trump knew that he was going to get the Supreme Court to back him up. We had taken this through the Department of Justice, the Office of Legal Counsel, which gave us an opinion that we knew was bulletproof that would get through the Supreme Court. President Trump pulled the trigger on that. We eventually backed off one nation. He took Iraq off the list, of which he was pressured by the Pentagon to do that. President Trump didn't do it, but he says, hey, for accommodation, I'll do it. Not one terrorist attack during President Trump's entire administration.
To come up with punishment that's far quicker and far greater than the punishment these animals are getting right now. Because what we have right now is a joke, and it's a laughing stock. I will say that I defeated ISIS. I heard it was going to take 5 years, and we did it in literally a couple of months. We have a great military, and they're not woke, and they never will be woke. They're not woke people. They couldn't be convinced to be woke, but we do have woke on top, and we have woke trying to do things with our military that they won't be successful in doing because they're too strong. We defeated ISIS. Our military was so strong. I worked with generals that were different generals than the television generals. They were incredible, their talent, their toughness, and they were great fighters. And I went literally to Iraq in order to find out why is it that we can't beat ISIS? What is it? We have the best equipment in the world, and by that time I had new equipment. I had ordered it, I bought it, rebuilt the whole thing. And I met with generals that said, we can beat them very quickly, sir. And I was told 5 years back in Washington, and they told me we can do it in 4 weeks. And a slight difference. And we did. We beat ISIS, took 100% of the ISIS caliphate, 100%. Now they're rebuilding.
McMaster's actually made a presentation in the national security space down there in the Kennedy Room. He made a presentation, and you got a picture of this. We're there to talk about, money and cash and weapons, what we control, what we don't control, where we're going to go with this, and it's just a morass. Because we'd been there at that time like 18 years, and these people have no earthly idea. Okay, Afghanistan's a massive country, and it's nothing. It's a total and complete disaster. They don't even have the ability to analyze and do analytics on what they've spent.
President Trump, and I hate to say it this way, but it's just the way I think about it, he knows how to speak alpha male. Like President Trump, when you look at how he dealt with Turkey, when they got off the rails, he said, you will get back with the program or I will crush the lira and I will crush your economy.
Are you concerned that Erdogan will try to wipe out the Kurds?
I will wipe out his economy if that happens. I've already done it once. I hope that he will act rationally.
And then lo and behold, Turkey got back with the program. And even with some of these third world despots, like the leaders of the Taliban, President Trump made them understand the personal consequences to them.
I said, don't go in, don't stop, because they were killing a lot of our soldiers during Obama in particular. And then it started a little bit with me. And I had a conversation. The press went absolutely wild when they heard about the conversation because they said, why would you speak to him? I said, because that's where the shooting is. That's where the killing is. He's the one doing the killing. He's the one you want to speak to, Jesse James. They said, why do you rob banks? He said, that's where the money is. Well, this is where the killing was, with Abdul and the Taliban. And I had a long talk with him on the telephone, and I said, don't do it, don't do it. And I don't want to tell you what I said because I think it's inappropriate, but he understood.
President Trump looked at the Taliban leader and said this: I want to leave Afghanistan, but it's going to be a conditions-based withdrawal. And translator translated. And he said, if you harm a hair on a single American, I'm going to kill you. Reached in his pocket, pulled out a satellite photo of the leader of the Taliban's home and handed it to him.
Shut up.
Got up and walked out the room.
And from that time forward, 18 months, we didn't have one soldier killed. There were no snipers shooting our soldiers as they walked down the street or anybody else. They were on good behavior.
My office in the White House, I saw this blurb coming across that the Pentagon had approved surgeries for transgender people in the military.
The Defense Department is paying the surgery costs for a transgender service member.
Transgender people will now be allowed to serve openly, and they will be eligible for any medically necessary care, including surgery.
And I thought, oh, this had to be a typo. So I called Mattis. Didn't really call Mattis or the Defense Department many times. I said, hey, this has got to be a mistake. Can you get your comms department, your PAO, your public affairs officer? You get those down right now. I'm sure there's some inadvertent leak from the Pentagon. And he said, oh, no. We've had a study and we've been doing this and working on this for years. This is a joint policy and this is out. And I go, hang on a second. Let me understand this. This transgender thing, like people in the military, we would actually pay for this. We would pay for the surgeries for these people. Oh, no, this is policy. We've worked on this for years. I said, hey, full stop. Let me hear this again. And he goes through the whole litany of transgenderism, this. And I said, and not just, you're going to keep them in the military, you're going to promote them, you're going to have surgeries, you're going to have aftercare. And I look at this thing as billions of dollars. And I said, have you lost your mind? And he gives me, I said, hang on a second. I said, come down. We walk right to the Oval Office. Ask President Trump, hey, can we clear some time out? General's got to tell you something. And I said, give him the pitch. Tell him what you just announced. And he gives it to Trump. And Trump just sits there. And President Trump is a great listener. I mean, he's not a guy in meetings telling people what to do. He listens, lets arguments go, and then comes in and makes decisions. He looks at Mattis and goes, at the end of it, goes, excuse me, what are you talking about? And it's just, and he says, well, it's already done. It's done. Nothing can happen. And President Trump calls the Hope Hicks, who's out there, and says, hey, can you get Don McGahn, who's the White House counsel? He says, get Don McGahn out here and tell him to bring a yellow pad. With Mattis sitting right there, and he gets down there and he says, look, how quickly can I get, when these executive orders, we had President Trump kind of trained by that time, how quickly can you get this thing, I'm gonna put it on an executive order right now. In fact, you're gonna write it down and we're just gonna do it. And he drafted an executive order countermanding everything. The Pentagon, he says, hey, look, here's what we're gonna do about that, nothing. In fact, I'm reversing everything. I don't give a damn about your report.
So I did sign a document that meant no operations in the military that cost $250,000 a person. You know, in the military, they have some rules and regulations that have been there from day one. No drugs. You can't have drugs. When you have those operations, you need massive amounts of drugs are necessary. And I did it for that reason, and I did it for other reasons. I also saw many of the generals and admirals, and I met with a lot of people, and I said, is this a good thing or a bad thing? And off the record, they said it was not good for the military. That's what they said. But if you see them, like, talking to the press or leaking or anything, they'll sort of maybe sometimes have a little different attitude. But they felt it was a very bad thing to have it.
President Trump wanted a combat-ready military whose task and purpose was to kill the enemies of the United States of America, not to be some social welfare organization taking care of psychos that have problems, that have daddy issues.
I ended it immediately, and when they got in, they ended what I did immediately, and I'll go back to what I had because it was the right thing to do.
It is not that we don't have good people. You have a system that's totally corrupted. And the system seems so overpowering and so big, it's very tough to go up against it. Let me give you an example. In the Kennedy room, which is the bigger of the situation rooms, when you go down to the National Security Council, essentially what the White House is, it's an Army command post with a nice, very elegant residence on one side and this little thing called the West Wing on the other that basically sits on a multi-story platform. Highly sophisticated command post. And that command post has these rooms where you have these meetings, you bring in the entire world. The one thing I'd asked when I first got there, since we were going on to the 20th year or the 18th year, I just asked the folks at the National Security Council and the Pentagon, I said, look, here's what I want to do. Before we get into what the plan's going to be, I just want to go back in time. I want to go back to the very beginning. And I said, I want to see the presentation that was given to the Commander-in-Chief. I want to see it. I want to see exactly, I want to go through every page. I want to see the deck. And they got hubba-da, 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 boom, 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 boom. And I'm sitting there, and he's getting ready to do it. He says, look, I want to tell you, we got this thing, we got this plan, we got this. He said, this may be the finest, this is the team is coming together, and it's the finest work, and the finest this, and we're the best, and we've just done this. And he goes on, and I finally had a belly full of it. And I said, hang on a second. I said, in this room, in this very room, smart people, tough people, good people, have sat around this from all the agencies, and they've had plans, and they've talked it through. And 18 years later, here's where we are. We're in a no-win situation with troops that are at risk every day. So don't sit here and tell me we're the best and we're all this. We're nothing more than what they were. So I want to see what the decisions were. And finally, I got those. And you know what it said? Everyone's the same. We're making progress. You know, it's just 18 months away. 18 months away is like, boom, it's like that, just straight up. Everything's gonna be great. The enemy's gonna be done. We're gonna get more territory. The people are gonna come to our side. They're gonna be voting. We got democracy, but it's only a little more away. It's incrementalism. It's all Vietnam. It's the theory of sunk costs. Well, we can't go back. We've already put so much in it. There's always so many dead, right? We've put so much money into this. We built so many relationships. We got it. It's just another 18 months. You just have to stick it out for another 18 months.
I am here tonight to lay out our path forward in Afghanistan. The men and women who serve our nation in combat deserve a plan for victory. They deserve the tools they need and the trust they have earned to fight and to win. Second, the consequences of a rapid exit are both predictable and unacceptable.
President Trump, who reads about 6 papers a day, saw it in an op-ed that Eric Prince did about how to set almost like a viceroy up in Afghanistan, that we would have a set time, a set amount of money, we'd actually get targeted of who we want to do is take out the bad guys, and we would start to actually do a wind down, but that had an end game that we would always have a capacity to take out the Taliban, and particularly to take out the jihadists.
The real issue for Donald Trump is that it was not a campaign promise. It was a promise to the American people. And so when you look at a promise to the American people, for him, it was coming to an agreement to let the Taliban know that America is strong and we will continue to be strong, and that we will take a back seat to no one. But yet do it in an orderly way that didn't leave Americans in harm's way, didn't give additional ammunition, both literally and figuratively, to our enemies. And as he worked on that agreement, it was all about a strategic way to withdraw from Afghanistan, so that we weren't in an endless war for really the American people to bear the brunt of. There was one thing that he stressed over and over again is that every decision that you make when you're talking about whether it's a withdrawal from Afghanistan or whether it's a strategic strike, is that you've got to be strong. You've got to be willing to do it. And that's what our men and women are trained for. But you also don't allow a political decision to put people in harm's way.
Iran would have made a deal. Everything was working out well. ISIS was gone. The whole world was at peace. Viktor Orban, who, as you know, is the head of Hungary, Prime Minister of Hungary, he said, bring back Trump and you'll have peace. And we had peace. We had a lot of peace. The whole world was peaceful, and now it's blowing up.
There's a theory of the case that the United States military is the last revered institution in America that has not been subject to capture by the left. I mean, it used to be when we created a lot of these agencies in Washington, you'd have balance. You'd have people who thought on the right and thought on the left. But you look at Department of Education, Department of Labor, EPA, the Woketopians have taken over. And you didn't see that as much in like the Department of Justice, the FBI, and the Department of Defense. And so then that became the focus. Take over the people who can prosecute you, take over the people who have the guns and the weapon systems. And they are on a full assault right now to convert those entities to their purposes.
Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, President Biden ended the ban on transgender troops today.
This is one of the very first things Biden did in office, besides opening the southern border, was to reverse everything we had done on transgenderism in the military. I mean, when I was in the military in the 70s, that type of psychological issue would be, you could not get a security clearance. You would be cashiered immediately.
So we have people in the military that are living on the street. They are incredible people. They're warriors, in many cases, great warriors, and they love our country. And we'll spend no money on them, and we'll spend $250,000 and even more than that on transgender transition operations. And a lot of those people don't last long in the military. They'll have the operation. Some people go into the military to get the operation and then they leave. They don't even want to be there, but they get the operation. It's very unfair to our military, our people, our veterans.
It's really strange. When I got this job in Congress, when you talk to folks on military bases, they always wanted the next runway paved or the next air tower, the next hangar system. And increasingly, the people in our military are complaining not about the physical infrastructure, but about the woke infrastructure that is being built all around them in a very constraining way. I still remember when women who were serving at a military base in my district complained to me that a man was showering in the women's facilities because he identified as a woman, I guess, that day or that month. And I just never would have believed when I first got this job that guys showering with women on the military base would be some issue I would have to confront. Lloyd Austin is, I think, the pinnacle example of someone failing up in the United States military. He initially was charged with training a resistance force in Syria to combat the Assad regime. And during his time as a general there, he had over $100 million to achieve that objective. And at the end of the first contact with the enemy, I think there were like 4 people that were still around from what General Austin had done. But nonetheless, he found upward mobility into the private sector where he worked for Raytheon. And there's this dangerous revolving door that exists between our generals and the military-industrial complex where failure continues to be funded and advanced for a profit motive, not a capability motive. So Lloyd Austin fails as a general, gets updrafted into the private sector into Raytheon, and then right back with Joe Biden as Secretary of Defense. We've seen America fall behind at really important stuff like space, AI, quantum, hypersonics. And at the same time, there seems to be this intense focus on the virtue signaling to the political left that will make people like Lloyd Austin accepted back at the fine wine dinners of Washington and in the faculty lounges of Ivy League schools, but certainly he's been seen for what he is among many in the fighting force.
Lloyd Austin ordering a service-wide stand-down for the next 60 days. The goal? Give military leaders the chance to address extremism in the ranks.
Then let's talk about the opportunity costs. You know where we have a real problem is aircraft crashing because they're not being maintained properly. Those are the types of things that you have training stand-downs for. Or if you have people that don't have the appropriate approach when you have ships running into each other because they haven't had appropriate sleep or training. Those are the types of things you say, hey, everybody stand down, let's reset. It's just all the wrong priorities coming out of Biden's leadership in the Pentagon. And when you have stand downs for that type of thing, coupled with base renamings, coupled with a push for electric tanks and a carbon neutral army, coupled with climate, it's all the wrong priorities.
General Milley is what you get when, someone moves their way through the military leadership structure with a political objective, not really a military or a mission objective. General Milley, was so eager to be regaled as this man of Princeton, this man of Washington, this great diplomat and thinker. But the reality is, Milley's just a thug. Milley was a thug who was willing to drive over 8,000 people out of the service because they wouldn't accept a vaccine mandate. Milley was a traitor when he went behind the President of the United States' back to talk to China about America's military posture on January 6th. And he escapes those things because there is a high society in Washington, New York, and if you wore those stars as a general and you virtue signal to the elites, then you get accepted into that world. And it's not only for social credit, it's also very financially lucrative.
See these stupid people on television, generals that are very woke, people like Milley and Mattis, and people thought they'd respect him, but they are woke. There's no question about it. And they sound so bad and so foolish. I watched Milley testifying in Congress, before Congress, talking about white pride or white privilege.
I want to understand white rage, and I'm white, and I want to understand it.
Talking about things that you're not supposed to be talking about as a general. And it was a great embarrassment, I think, just watching that's our military.
With the Biden crowd, I get the sense sometimes that all of foreign policy to them is like an essay exam at the Georgetown School of Foreign Service, that it's all paint by numbers, that it's all very predictable. And that actually has real costs and consequences to America because the other side knows exactly where you're going. Sometimes a little bit of unpredictability salted into your actions keeps everybody on their best behaviors. When Donald Trump was president, even the dictators stayed on their best behavior. Now with Joe Biden, we get war without winning. We get all of this weakness and weirdness and wokeness, and it does not inure to the benefit of our nation and our wealth and our prosperity.
In the Biden regime, then you could even see under Obama, because you've seen the disaster that the military has become. You've seen it from the recruiting, you've seen the DEI, you've seen the social justice warriors, you've just seen the pure total incompetence of it.
And similarly, we had military families complain about drag queen story hours occurring on military bases during the daytime for children. Like, of all the things that should be happening on a military base for family and morale and welfare, the notion that you're doing drag queen shows for kids on military bases, it shows how much we've lost the plot here and lost the critical objective that the military ought to be focused on. The real danger there is if you look at who makes up the fighting force, it's a lot of white boys from the American South. That's just a fact. And when you adopt these policies that become repugnant to Christians, to patriotic Americans, to people who are white, to men, then you're doing great damage to the recruiting structure. Now, the argument on the other side is they say, look, we have real recruiting challenges, and so we have to go and build out mechanisms to recruit people who don't want to join the military now. The problem is, in an effort to achieve that result, they are depressing interest in the military from the largest contribution that makes up the fighting force.
The military was once a place of genuine equal opportunity. President Truman removed race from Army personnel files from 1948 to 1964 because he wanted to genuinely pursue equal opportunity for the military.
I think there's a number of things that are affecting the crisis that we're in when it comes to military recruiting, and it is a crisis. It's the worst since Vietnam. The Army especially is down 45,000 just in the last couple of years. I mean, that's a couple of divisions worth. And keep in mind, after we were down 45,000, they were this close to kicking out another 20,000 over a COVID vaccine that doesn't stop the spread as a personal health decision.
The COVID-19 mandate that separated thousands of our troops for not taking a politicized COVID-19 vaccine was a direct attempt by these military leaders to get right-leaning conservatives separated from the military because they want to reorient the military. We can't let them get away with it but they're well on their way to succeeding in what they're attempting to do.
To touch on the psyche, soldiers need a unit environment where they are confident that the men with whom they are going to fight a war are the best men for a given job, and that they're the best machine gunner, they're the best medic, the best radio operator, and it is that excellence, and I can tell you this personally, that gives people the confidence to go on really daring, dangerous missions and engage in ground combat. In the 1960s, our military became an institution that must mirror the society that it's sworn to defend, even though our society and our military exist on the basis of very different values and principles. And since the 60s, in administrations, Republican and Democrat, but certainly most brazenly in the Obama and Biden administrations, we have demanded that life in the military must be the same as life as a civilian American. You hear the belief and the mandate that units must look a certain way racially, or now based on sex. That undermines that confidence in the integrity of the military profession that is based on merit. And in January of 2024, we found Army internal recruiting data that showed the Army is deliberately not hiring enough white Americans in order to meet race goals established by the Biden Pentagon. That means that we don't have enough soldiers to fight in any number of the hotspots that are developing around the world as we speak.
I can't imagine, and I've had to do this, ordering Green Berets to charge a machine gun nest. One may be black, one may be white. Is one wondering, wait, should I go first because of my history of privilege that I've been told is kind of bestowed upon me, or is the African American Green Beret saying, wait, is the officer ordering me because of my skin color? And you start to put cracks and fissures in unit cohesion, into morale, into how your fellow teammates, shipmates, squad mates see each other. And the military I was brought up in, you didn't see any of that. You left your politics at the door. Look, underpinning our entire approach to the world is a progressive left that doesn't believe this is an exceptional country, that at their core believes, look, this is a systemically racist, misogynist, colonialist country, right? And so, again, going back to the recruiting crisis, who wants to go out and fight and die for that? If you've been taught, as the progressives have taken over our educational system, that this is a fundamentally bad country, you don't want to necessarily go die for that. What family of color, when we go back to recruiting, would then want their son or daughter joining a military that the first African-American Secretary of Defense sent the message to the whole country is overrun with white extremists? I think that message from him was incredibly damaging. Our most significant advantage against the Chinese right now is our submarine fleet, because that can get under the water under their barrage of missiles that'll be coming after our aircraft carriers. You know what? 40% of our submarines are so broken they can't leave the repair docks. Those are the kinds of issues that Secretary of Defense should be focused on. How about the fact that we have barracks with feces all over the bathrooms, with black mold infecting the barracks rooms, with the ceilings falling in? They've been so badly maintained. We had a whole barracks complex in Camp Lejeune so infested with cockroaches, you had to evacuate all the Marines. Our service members deserve better, and they deserve the right priorities from our leaders. Instead, you've got this political agenda that's being forced down our military's throats. It's hurting recruiting, it's hurting readiness, it's hurting their lethality. And I think our adversaries see this, and it's one of the many reasons they're on the march.
Secretary Austin, General Milley, and obviously President Biden wanted the Pentagon and the Department of Defense writ large to be the example of their effort to remake the federal government and therefore our country in the mold of the left. They pursued an extremist stand down to purge the mythical existence of right-wing extremists from the ranks of the military. Undersecretary of Defense Kathleen Hicks established insane quotas for promotion standards on the basis of race and sex. Again, not merit or your ability to do your job, and not even your income level, but this color of your skin. And they pursued a vaccine mandate that was not necessarily meant to instill good health and readiness in the military, but was meant to weed out those who wanted to resist what was a rushed deployment of a vaccine and those who had reasonable religious conscience objections. They wanted to remake the military in their image. And whatever the military did overseas or at home to actually defend America was secondary to that goal of institutional takeover. And they wasted no time doing that, and I fear that we're catching on to their tack a little bit too late.
He had reached out to us and said he was going to be moved out of Jordan to a place that he couldn't tell us about. Well, I follow the news on a daily basis. I knew where the hot zones were at, and I knew that meant he had to be going to Afghanistan. It was radio silent for a little while, and I finally get a call from him again after he had been to Afghanistan now, and he was there for a couple of days and reached out, and he said, "Dad, I thought I was gonna die that first day."
After consulting closely with our allies and partners, with our military leaders and intelligence personnel, with our diplomats and our development experts, with the Congress and the Vice President, as well as with Mr. Ghani and many others around the world, I've concluded that it's time to end America's longest war. The United States will begin our final withdrawal, begin it on May 1 of this year. We'll not conduct a hasty rush to the exit. We'll do it responsibly, deliberately, and safely. And we will do it in full coordination with our allies and partners.
President Biden always said that he wants you to be the last person in the room, particularly for big decisions, just as he was for President Obama. He just made a really big decision. Afghanistan.
Yes.
Were you the last person in the room?
Yes.
And you feel comfortable?
I do. I do.
The first thing that struck me in this was the timing of Joe Biden's announcement. I just thought, this is terrible. And the reason is because, for those who have served there, we understand the Taliban fought seasonally. So we used to use a term called the Taliban Spring-Summer Offensive. And we first came in sort of at the start of that offensive, and it was tough. Things were touch and go. And almost every year it is that they come out of Pakistan, where they've been sort of hibernating for the winter because, again, the cold is just so extreme in most parts of Afghanistan they can't fight. Right away, I thought to myself, this will not be good.
As the world watches in shock, Taliban soldiers are taking control of Afghanistan with lightning speed.
NBC News has confirmed that Bagram is now in the hands of the Taliban. They're emptying out the prison there, which contains 5,000 to 7,000 of the most hardened Taliban and al-Qaeda fighters. What's your response there to Bagram Air Base falling and really just the trajectory here of this day?
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, Lindsay, this does not bode well for what will happen next in the capital.
The Kabul airport was really interesting. Flying into it, it was just surrounded by the city, surrounded by high ground. One of the worst places I could have imagined to have done a non-combatant evacuation operations, which is what they did, because it's fully expect that everyone in the city would want to try to get out during that time frame. And so watching all those pieces together, they gave up Bagram, which would have been a place they could have flown people back and forth to.
We can go into some of the other aspects of what should have occurred with Bagram Airfield, because that's absolutely essential to understanding the negligence and incompetence of this withdrawal. If you'd maintained control of Bagram Airfield, and most people don't know the geography, the airfield that was used, the main international airport, is right inside the urban area. It's almost impossible to completely defend. if the city around you has fallen. However, Bagram Airfield is over a mountain range about 20 miles away, connected by a very good interstate highway. And if we'd maintained control of that base, which was one of our main bases throughout the effort, you could land multiple aircraft, or the largest aircraft in the world there, in the middle of a plain, very defendable, especially by a military using drones and air power such as we had. Very defendable, very secure, perfect geographic location. But one of the key decisions, errors made by the Biden administration, was to turn Bagram over to the Taliban and abandon it, and then withdraw into the city of Kabul. So again, it just shows the negligence and in my view, almost corrupt approach the Biden administration took to this withdrawal.
We left it. We gave it to them on a silver platter. We didn't even turn the lights out.
Large swaths of Afghanistan are falling back into the hands of the Taliban. The spate of attacks dramatically increasing.
If you look at some of the initial pictures of the insurgents, the Taliban and the Haqqani, occupying the presidential palace, most people don't know that two of the main U.S. efforts as far as the intelligence community and the military are like within a block of that office. And U.S. personnel were still there when the insurgents occupied those desks. So this shows a couple of things. One, the unpreparedness of everyone on our side for that eventuality, and the fact that the Afghans unilaterally cut a deal with the insurgents. And as we had tried to cut them out of the negotiations, they cut us out of those negotiations. From a cultural perspective, this is how the Afghans do business. They've always done business like that. If you look back to the British experience in the 19th century, that's absolutely what happened, where the British envoy was murdered in Kabul, and the city rose up and destroyed an entire British army as it tried to withdraw. I mean, that was absolutely with no warning. The Afghans cut a deal and then rose up against the British and did that similar sort of treachery. But this is part of their culture. And when they see things going a certain way, they're going to cut a deal to their own personal benefit.
Chaos at Kabul's airport, a sign of the distress over what's ahead. With Afghanistan's land borders under Taliban control, thousands crowded onto the tarmac. No visible security or any semblance of order.
I'm Stephen Sullivan from Long Island, New York. I joined the Marine Corps after high school. I came out as a corporal.
I'm Sergeant Michael Marklin. I served 5 years in the United States Marine Corps as an infantry rifleman 0311 and an 8156, a Marine security guard.
I was assigned to 1st Battalion, 8th Marines as a mortarman, Bravo Company.
I did 2 years in diplomatic missions overseas.
It kind of was coming down to the point like something's going down. We might need you guys to go into Afghanistan and help with the evacuation.
And then wound up ending up in Afghanistan in the month of August 2021.
The day prior, you're seeing people fall off planes. They were so desperate to leave. That was a big, obstacle for us because obviously the airfield wasn't operating because people took it over, the Afghani civilians. So we had to wait for our Marines that were on the ground there to get them off the airstrip and allow us to continue operations landing planes.
Before getting to Afghanistan, seeing that one of the planes returned with a body still on the landing gear because it froze over the airspace of Afghanistan, which was interesting, and we realized then it was nothing like we were kind of expecting.
Because things fell apart so badly, you did have the average citizen in Kabul that wanted to get out. Of course, you saw that. You saw people falling off aircraft. You saw, just mayhem in everyone trying to get out. So the problem became that you had particularly these young males who'd be a lot stronger that were fighting at the front rows to get in through the gates. You had the poor Marines and soldiers who were there trying to quality control things into who was supposed to come in. And so you had these, again, women, children, families of interpreters who ended up going so far as to try to throw babies up to get them out because they would have been killed.
Once we got to the gates, though, that's when the situation was clear to me what was actually going on. And the gates were what was flooded with what I could say is, as far as my eyes could see, was people. They often call it the sea of people. But as far as my eyes could see were people, and I was like, wow, this is very different. Even walking up to the gate, the north gate where we were at, the sound of the gate was extremely it's like being at a theme park and you hear a roller coaster, but you don't know where it is or you don't know how close you are to it. It's like this buzz of constant noise. It was constant gunfire, whether being automatic or riot control grenades or screams and yells.
Hey, watch out.
Do you thoroughly remember seeing this kid no more than 2 years old? He was missing a shoe, snot coming down his nose, crying, shaking, all the bodily reactions you would expect in chaos. And it really just opened up my eyes. Like, okay, we're dealing with something else here, because it was kind of extreme to me to see that. Within 3 months, Taliban was banging on the door at Kabul. We were told, from what I understand, like they weren't supposed to be there. I do remember physically seeing on post, holding security, make sure the perimeter was secure, a white flag, and that flag was the Taliban's flag.
I've seen mangled people come up too, and they need immediate medical care, and we unfortunately couldn't offer them that because we didn't have the supplies, A. B, they didn't have a visa and didn't understand how the process works. The full scope of humanity I saw, from life, a woman going into labor to the babies getting thrown like a frisbee overhead into a creek.
So you had all these soldiers and Marines that were at these gates, not just Abbey Gate, but the other gates too, that were in a terrible situation. I can't even imagine, from what I understand, women throwing babies up and just things that I never saw. I saw combat, I saw people killed, but things at the gates, I can't imagine what the soldiers and Marines went through.
Middle-aged Afghani civilian with a gunshot wound to the neck. And we had a couple Marines that were a little bit more trained with CLS, Combat Lifesaver, and they started rendering aid. I started using my hands wherever they needed me to help. Finally, a corpsman came, and that's like, we talk about like the death rattle. That dude, he was spent. Like, he got shot in the neck, and there was only so much we could do. And I just remember carrying his limp body out of the turnstile as he's just struggling to breathe.
But as soon as we slide this carport gate open, people start flooding in, and they push this door even wider open. I get overran, and I'm the first guy within that gate, and I'm freaking out because I'm trying to hold it. And then you hear everybody screaming, "We're getting overrun, we're getting overrun."
I've spent lots of time at the airport. I've spent lots of time there in what we call the green zone, just a couple kilometers where the U.S. Embassy and the various other U.S. government efforts were centered, all just within a couple kilometers of each other, the airport and then the green zone downtown. I've spent lots of time there, very familiar with the terrain. As you probably know, the airport was defended by belts and belts of defensive systems that have been fortified over a period of 20 years. So to see Afghans having just overrun that area and be on the runway, there's only one answer to that, and that's just negligence. There's no way with any kind of effort that Afghans could penetrate that airport unless you just let them in and were just negligently and more importantly, chaotically and unprepared for that type of a withdrawal and that type of effort.
We all didn't really understand if command had our back or if higher-ups had our back, and also the rules of engagement were a little bit foggy because we were there under the premise of a non-combative evacuation operation, which became combative immediately.
Sit down! Do you see? Sit down!
They also pushed the deadline back while we were there. It was originally September 11th, and they pushed it to August 31st. So that immediately crammed you into this window of 16, 17 days, which we were letting them do, which, on the ground it made things way more chaotic because once the general public heard that, they were flooding the gates and stuff. So I think there's no justification to it, but a lot of the standards that were set up were being passed by the collection of the executives or people in power and the Taliban, which totally cut us out of the picture. We all kind of had a weird feeling. I remember walking around to my command element and being like, this is weird. I have an eerie feeling.
They're like, he's a younger individual, probably clean shaven, wearing a brown man dress with some like black outer garb of some sort and a black bag, and traveling with an older individual. My first reaction, I was like, how the f do we have an exact description of this guy? I was like, if we have an exact description of this guy and we know that he's coming to Abbey Gate, that means you have a motherfucker watching him. You have someone watching him, someone operating in the AO, or who knows where he's going to be. Why are we not stopping him before he gets to us?
I requested engagement authority while my team leader was ready on the M110 semi-automatic sniper system. We asked him if we could shoot. Our battalion commander said, and I quote, "I don't know," end quote.
We were watching him for a couple hours, like quite a few hours, still continuously requesting engagement authority. And finally it's like, no. And I was like, well, send the battalion commander up here because we're gonna shoot this guy if you don't. The battalion commander comes up, Lieutenant Colonel Brad Whited, and he comes up to the tower. We show him the photos, and he's just kind of sitting on, the heels of his feet, like, well. And we're like, well, sir, do we have your permission to engage? Like, we've had counter intel, psychological operations, and ourselves positive ID on this guy. This is the description. And he was like, well, yeah, it does look like it, but I don't have that authority. 10 minutes goes by and just flash and just get hit with this massive wave of pressure. My eyes are closed, my vision's black, and I'm like slowly coming to. My right ear is just like super high pitched ringing. My left ear is muffled and I can just hear people screaming in the distance. And I knew right away, as soon as I like was coming to, I was like, holy f***. Like I just got blown up.
I was awoke to the alarm going off, ground attack. I was like, what's going on? No one really knew, but all I knew was I need to make sure I get my kit on, get all my gear on, get ready to go, make sure my Marines are ready to go.
And we just hear ground attack, and we have our corpsmen, our Doc McCormick, and a few other corpsmen around there. They're out and about, they're letting us know, like, hey, make sure you got tourniquets, like 2-1 just got hit, the other gate just got hit is what I was hearing a lot.
We do have a lot of news to get to this morning, starting with that chaos following the horrific attack outside the Kabul airport. This is now the deadliest attack on U.S. forces in Afghanistan in more than a decade.
Immediately in front of me just got evaporated, just eviscerated, just gone, just in an instant, gone. And then outside of that, just bodies, body parts, and guts and pieces of people and human beings.
People need our help, right? And we got told to stand down. We're not going to support the Abbey Gate, which was kind of like a gut punch because you don't know at the time if it's Marines, if it's our NATO allies that are there that are getting injured, if it's just civilians. It was a really gut-wrenching feeling because you know people are hurting and you have the capability to help them, and you're told you can't.
The size of what happened didn't get relayed at all, and it wasn't getting relayed for a while. I think we were having problems with comms and communication with that side of the base. And we passed by this casualty collection tent. As soon as we see this tent, there's people running into it with gurneys full of like people missing parts and just blood pouring off the Polis litters. So for me, it was like, this clearly isn't getting communicated well to the boys back at the barracks.
Sergeant Vargas had identified the target, the suicide bomber, at the Abbey Gate and had told his chain of command, I've got the target in sight, fits the description, permission to engage. They would not give him permission, and he could not get permission. And when he asked his battalion commander, well, how do I get permission, or who can give me permission? The battalion commander said, I don't know. ROE, rules of engagement exist. So at that moment, the soldier doesn't have to jeopardize their life waiting for somebody else to answer the question. The rules of engagement exist because decisions have to be made at that moment, which means life or death. And unfortunately, the decision wasn't made by the people that should have and could have made it. And now we have 13 dead Americans that are never coming home to their parents. Their families are never going to be parents and grandparents members who sign the blank check that say, I will give my life in defense of my country, it's under the understanding that I'm going to be able to defend myself and I'm not going to sacrifice my life for nothing. Unfortunately, that's what happened at the Abbey Gate and the departure of the airport at Kabul and in Afghanistan.
They did sort of a procession for the deceased, and that was like, I guess, like what made it real. Like they brought them through so everybody could, you know, give their respects and send them off. And that was like, that was tough, knowing that, you know, my brothers and sisters died. And, you know, that just brings me back to, well, why couldn't I go over there and help? It's really tough. That's the one thing, like, after the fact, thinking about it very hard, is knowing that, you know, there's 13 families out there with one less son or daughter. And I remind myself that every day, you know. That's the toughest part for me is dealing with that. And, you know, if I need to ever give myself and to keep pushing and keep going, it's for those 13.
My son and I were together in Nicole's hometown, in their hometown, visiting with family. I was working out in the hotel gym so that I could tell Nicole how proud she could be of me that I had made it to the gym. And a news bulletin came on that there had been 13 casualties at the airport. So I went and found Jared, my son. I went and found my son. And we waited.
You know, I just started sobbing because I thought, yeah, why is he not calling his mama? You know, I'm his mama. Why is he not calling his mama? And why is he not texting his mama?
It started with, I think, 3, quickly climbed to 7, then to 10 or 11. Really hoped and prayed I would have heard from him that night. Never did.
As time passed and we didn't hear from her, and she wasn't on social media, my son said to me, Mom, I have a really bad feeling.
Next thing I heard about was a knock on the door at roughly 2:30 in the morning. I usually sleep really deep, and something got me up when that knock happened, and I walked out there, and we have a opaque type glass in the door, and it was dark out, obviously, and I could see silhouettes on the other side of the glass. Not knowing who was out there, I flipped the light on, and all I could see were the medals.
It was probably around 10 o'clock at night, and I'm like, phew. You know, he's fine. You know, I'm just gonna go do some laundry. So I started to walk down the stairs, and a doorbell, that sickening doorbell ring. And I just looked at my son-in-law, and I mean, 10 o'clock at night, we live in the country, out in the middle of the country. What?
I opened the door, greeted by 2 Marines. Still hadn't sunk in why they were even there.
I had seen the news story that there were 13, so I asked, is she one of the 13? Is she one of the 13? I think I asked a lot of times. I really couldn't wrap my head around it.
So I just turned the stairs, and I see 3 Marines standing at the door's glass. I see 3 Marines in their dress standing at the door. I just collapsed.
Pero cuando entran y te dicen, lo siento, señora, su hijo murió sirviendo a su país. Mi mundo se cayó por completo. Mi niño de ojos verdes no estaba más aquí.
And I get a phone call from my dad. And Dad had been crying, I could tell by his voice. My dad never cries. And he told me that there were 2 Marines standing at the door of the house, and that they needed to talk to me.
And then those 2 Marines sat down with us at our dining room table. And shared with us the news that we had lost Jared. It didn't have to happen.
You know, it's hard to watch. It's hard to watch those parents. And as a dad, you know, my heart goes out to all of them because, as that mom said, it didn't have to happen. It didn't have to happen. It wouldn't have happened if President Trump had been in the Oval Office. Rhetoric has been shared to suggest, well, it had to be done this way. Well, I can tell you the conditioned approach on which the agreement to get out of Afghanistan was not only clear, but it was also one that made sure that American interests, American lives, and certainly the men and women that serve our great country were not put at risk. So to suggest that a baton was passed to Joe Biden and his administration, and they were left holding the bag of this is the way that it had to be done, I can tell you that's just not accurate.
And if you listen to Biden or you listen to Kamala speaking, they talk about it like it was such a wonderful thing and it was such a bad thing. Getting out wasn't bad. It should have never been in there in the first place. But the way they got out was so embarrassing, so horrible, so terrible. And but you watch them and they say, oh, it was wonderful, it was flawless. Kamala Harris recently said it was a flawless operation. And people don't know because people don't remember that, you know, somebody that's driving a taxi or sitting in an office someplace, they don't remember how bad it was. But it was just a horrible period of time, and it caused us great damage. It caused the world great damage because other countries acted up that they wouldn't have acted that way. They wouldn't have been acting that way. And one would be Russia. Russia would not have gone into Ukraine if it weren't for that incompetent withdrawal from Afghanistan.
The last 2 days, we were instructed to destroy stuff. And that was a couple days after the whole Abbey Gate situation and the explosion. So we're going through the Turkish barracks, all these barracks that are left there that are nice barracks, and we're just destroying everything. Anything that alludes to a better quality of life, anything that alludes to just this facility or structure or anything in here being operable and usable. And we destroy it all. These are the guys that I was told about my whole Marine Corps career. Before my Marine Corps career, these were always the enemy. These were always the guys that we're training to fight in this 20-year war. And now we're giving them this base. So we were in a headspace where we're like, they're not gonna have a good, you know, a good standard of life. But immediately after that, and before kicking out and heading on to our flight, we were told that we can't head to our flight until we clean up the base that we just destroyed. Things is like picking up garbage or things you might think is garbage. That's potentially an explosive device or some sort of IED. There's no point to. I mean, in a combat environment, especially if we're exfilling, and we're turning this over to the Taliban, we shouldn't be concerned about if it's clean and tidy for them. And then at this point, we all were kind of like, are you kidding me? Like, our blood's boiling. And the chain of command was like, they were helpless too. They're like, we're all gonna hit up our congressman. You guys better hit up your congressman when you get back too. And I was being told that in Afghanistan to hit up my congressman, and I was like, that is not even gonna be what I'm thinking about after all of this.
After the announcement, I, along with other Republican and Democrat members of Congress, urged the president to prepare for the withdrawal and its inevitable fallout. Unfortunately, those warnings were ignored. As the withdrawal date neared, the situation in Afghanistan deteriorated as the Taliban gained significant ground across the country. As a result, in July of 2021, 23 State Department employees in Kabul sent a dissent cable channel to Secretary Blinken warning of their grave concerns for Afghanistan's stability and for their own safety. Yet nothing was done. Instead, our investigation uncovered the White House refused to listen to warnings about the situation on the ground. Disturbingly, we have uncovered that State Department leadership prohibited its employees from even uttering the word NEO, shorthand for emergency evacuation.
Where are our top leaders? You know, have any of us heard President Biden and Vice President Harris at the State of the Union or in any other venue talk and convey to those left behind, both the Americans and our allies, you're not forgotten?
What could have been different? I mean, to those parents of the 13 and the family members of the 13 heroes that we lost that day at Abbey Gate in Afghanistan, what would have been different if General Milley and Secretary Austin were focused more on what was going on in Afghanistan than settling political scores with their political enemies and advancing a woke agenda? We will never know.
Biden checked his watch on every last one of them going off that plane. I don't know where he had to be or what was going on, but he checked his watch every single time.
It's more than just looking at your watch. It's looking the other way.
There is no more unique, even almost sacred ceremony than a ramp ceremony. I was part of some overseas where we sent bodies back home. And it's often senior leaders, including President Biden, who are part of ramp ceremonies receiving those perished service members back at Dover. There is no more special time for a soldier's family than when he finally comes home. And those soldiers, those Marines, didn't come home alive. And President Biden was checking his watch probably because he had so many caskets to receive. He had 13 caskets to receive, which happened at the height of the Iraq War in times, but it had been a while since we had a ramp ceremony with over 13 caskets to come off the plane. He didn't have time for them, even though the nature of that withdrawal was his order, even though there is no other decision he makes that puts Americans in harm's way than those relating to military affairs overseas. He didn't have time for them. And that's what Americans should see, is that President Biden doesn't have time for his most solemn duty to the men and women who put their lives on the line.
It's disgusting to me, I think. It's very disrespectful. These are Americans that put their hand up and pledge to this country, to serve, to protect. And is there something more important happening? These people put their lives on the line for our freedoms that we have here, and you couldn't even give the time of day, it seemed like. It's very appalling.
Biden looking at his watch like 4 or 5 times as the bodies came off the plane. That was a terrible scene. That was a terrible vision for people.
I've been to Dover during dignified transfers when my own constituents were killed in Afghanistan. I was there with President Trump. It was a rainy night, and I remember President Trump saying to me, "Matt, we have to be here because we have to show the country the cost of these wars. We have to show the country the sacrifice." President Trump understood the value of conveying pain and conveying the type of ultimate sacrifice people make. And he understood how personal that was, and he spent hours with family members there. He'd cut short political rallies and activities to be there. It was essential to him. President Obama didn't really like to go to Dover. It wasn't something that was a priority to him. And with President Biden, it seems to be more of a chore than something very meaningful and very significant to reflect on what it costs to maintain a free and prosperous and forward-leaning nation.
Why does the military exist? The military does not exist as a social organization. The military exists to provide security capability and defend this nation. And so you have to ask yourself in any decision which goes on in the military, what does this do to contribute to the capability of the military to defend the nation, to be a world power, to face the challenges that we're facing throughout the world? You have to have a strong military. And a strong military does not necessarily mean a military that reflects diversity that you want to achieve in a society. The military is unique. War is unique from the rest of society, and that's what Marxism has undercut in our military. Not allowing us to develop the culture and develop the units and the capability that we need as a unique aspect to defend democracy. The withdrawal from Afghanistan, the absolute disaster of that, is just a symptom of this approach to rotting out the military from within with DEI and all these other programs that are really just aspects of Marxism.
I think it's very important to have merit-based in terms of rank in the military, and they are getting away from it. They're getting DEI, they're getting all sorts of new concepts for a military. It's very simple. It's got to be based on merit. You got to be the tough one, the strong one, the smart one. That's the way you go up. It's the military. We have to win wars. We have to beat people. And you can't do that with their woke concepts. And when you have somebody in the military and they go up in rank, they're going up in rank because of merit, because they're better than the other people. And that's the way the other people want it also. You can't just do something for a crazy reason, and everybody knows what the crazy reasons are. So we're going back immediately to merit-based promotion.
It's hard for many of us that have served in times where our military was hands down the best on the planet to now watch these scenes unfold on national television because of a complete lack of leadership and because we have individuals in charge of things that are pretty much completely incompetent and focused on entirely the wrong things.
Problem is a lot of the higher ups in the military have become too cozy with the other elements within what, of course, we term the deep state, but really the bureaucracy that has become very progressive.
And without a doubt, DEI, no matter what, undercuts the capabilities of the U.S. military.
The mindset is very different now, where it's not based on that meritocracy. It's not based on your capabilities or abilities. It's based on, we want to show that the military is inclusive of all kinds of things that are not conducive to order and discipline. The military runs on order and discipline, which are standards. And if you can't maintain those standards because you want to live a different life, we're not mad at you. We don't disagree with your willingness or your desire to do that. We're just saying that this program is not for you, because if we can't have order and discipline and standards, people are going to lose their lives. The military needs to focus, and the members of the military need to focus on lethality and readiness, being ready to engage the enemy with deadly force when necessary. And so anything else other than focusing on that is a distraction from that and makes it unsafe. It makes it unsafe for every single individual. The individual that wants to be a DEI recruit and be himself or herself, and the individual that's standing right next to that person that has trained and says, I want to maintain the standard, but yet I've got to work with this person who doesn't recognize the standard, the order, the discipline that is required to successfully complete the most difficult missions on the planet, which are fighting America's wars against an enemy with resolve who will kill you in a heartbeat. That formula doesn't work.
Ever since the Biden administration took over, it's one thing after another. I mean, it's the extremism in the military, and they spent thousands upon thousands of man-hours that our troops were engaged in and focused on that, when they should have been focused on how do we safely pull our troops out and end the war in Afghanistan in a way that would not cause the lives of our soldiers and pave the way for that situation to be left behind in a better way than what we found it.
When Biden got in, he didn't know what he was doing, frankly, and they lost respect for our country. They respected our country when I was here. When I was at that, when I was the commander-in-chief, which is really the position you're talking about, having to do with that, they respected our country a lot. And Abdul respected our country. And we had no killing whatsoever for 18 months until that horrible day where They lost so many people. And I'm not just saying from the American standpoint. I mean, hundreds of people were killed. It was the wrong airport to be lifted from. It was Bagram. I was going to keep Bagram. We were leaving, but we were leaving with dignity and with grace and with strength. We were strong, and we were leaving, and we were going to keep Bagram, which is one of the biggest airfields in the world. And we were keeping it not because of Afghanistan, we were keeping it because of China. They were 1 hour away from where China makes its nuclear weapons. And now China is running Bagram, if you can believe it. It's very unfair too. You know, we have great people and they're not treated right. That includes all the people that come running across the border. They end up with cell phones, they stay in hotels, they live like kings. And in the meantime, our military people are living on the streets outside of the hotels where illegal aliens are put up, in some cases, luxury hotels. It's a very unfair situation. We'll be out of that very quickly.
I've since come to understand and believe that people in suits in Washington made decisions that killed my daughter.
Lo puedo decir con toda certeza. Joe Biden mató a mi hijo.
These moves were not done by a leader. These moves were made by a coward, an amateur. Clearly somebody who has had a track record of screwing up everything when it comes to foreign affairs. What I want to tell the veterans out there that fought in that war, this is not the boots' fault. This is the suit's fault, through and through.
Joe Biden has been disgraceful over all of this. He's never acknowledged a single one of the 13. He's never said our kids' names. He's never even acknowledged his complete and utter screw up. And there needs to be accountability. Things need to change. We need to refocus on what's important. Our military, every day, they go and they protect all of us. And he shows no interest at all in caring about them. They're just a number. They're just a casualty. They're just a cog in the wheel. And things need to change.
I knew he'd be the one that was going to carry on our name, and that no longer will happen. And I blame Joe Biden for that. My name died with you. I'm 53 years old. I started voting at the age of 18. I voted for Barack Obama. I don't vote for party, I vote for candidate. If this had been done by Trump, I'd be just as disgusted and just as upset. But the biggest difference is I find it hard to believe that A, this would have ever happened, B, it ever would have been handled the way it was handled after the fact.
As Gold Star parents had an opportunity to testify in Washington at a round table, at that time, we reached out to the White House and asked for the attention of our commander-in-chief. We have not been responded to date. But when President Trump heard that we were going to be in DC, he asked us if we would like to come and meet with him in Bedminster. And we agreed. We said yes. President Trump knew my daughter's story. He knew her name. He said her name out loud. He took the time to listen to our stories, to our heroes' lives, to our memories.
Trump is our last hope for this country. That is what it is. I don't care. He's our last hope, and you know, you talk to that man, you look at him, and you can tell that he loves this country and loves me more than they hate him, and that's why I'm here. That's why I want people to know that Taylor existed and Taylor fought for this country, and Taylor loved this country and loved us more than those terrorists hated him.
So I show up and I go to these hearings and I watch politicians who've been on that dais longer than my daughter lived make decisions that are continuing to kill our troops. And I don't know how that's happened, but I have to help change it. Because these aren't just our troops, these are the best, the brightest we have. As parents, we gave the best of ourselves. Our kids are all better than we are, every one of them. And we're not getting the best in return from our people who make the decisions that dictate their actions.
Our granddaughters, with a piece of paper and a crayon, could have come up with a better plan than what was there. President Trump needs to get back in and needs to take this country back and put it back where it needed to be all along.
Afghanistan.
Yes.
Were you the last person in the room?
Yes.
And you feel comfortable?
I do.
You have the president of our country stating that he's never had troops die in the past decade. He's been the president, or whatever he said. I still have a hard time understanding.
I'm the only president this century that doesn't have any, this decade, that doesn't have any troops dying anywhere in the world.
To me, it's just, that's what's gonna put this in the dirt. All the stuff that matters, that's what's gonna bury these stories. That's what's gonna make it harder for this group of veterans to heal. And that's what's gonna keep me doing stuff where I can get it out there. Because I don't think we've seen any resolve.
We had casualties in Iraq and Afghanistan, but it's been a long time, I'd say World War II, since we faced the kind of numbers of casualties that we may have to face. And is the military ready for that? Does give me a lot of pause. And so I as both a father, being from the military, that's the reason I'm doing this. I know there'll be some kind of retribution on this end for, speaking out this way, but I need to, and I care deeply. And in the end state, again, it's not to get revenge, but to get us back to what we've been and what made America such a great nation.
I would fire 30% of the Pentagon. It's an anachronism. It's a bureaucratic, exact characterization of the swamp. I could tell you stories and stories over and over again where the Pentagon has failed to achieve its objectives, failed to operate efficiently, failed to meet the national interests, failed in its mission of meeting the national interests. So that's what I would do.
On Joe Biden's watch, America has evacuated 11 embassies. None of them as disastrously as Afghanistan, but 11 embassies. We've been run out of 11 countries on Joe Biden's watch. I mean, what a record.
No general has ever been punished. No one in the administration has ever been held accountable. It's disgraceful. And because of that, we're doomed to repeat the same mistakes over again if there's never any accountability.
We have hostages over there now. We have Americans over there. We left Americans over there in addition to everything else. And I think when Putin saw that, he had eyes always. It was the apple of his eye. He looked at us and he looked at that incompetent move. And I think other people lost respect to it. I think it was the most embarrassing day in the history of our country. And it was so badly handled, and leaving the equipment, losing the 13 men and all of those horribly injured people, and leaving Americans behind. A big thing. We left Americans behind. And as people know, he moved the military out first. And I could just imagine Abdul when they told him, Abdul, the Americans have left, they have taken the military. He probably looked at the people telling him that and said, you fool, of course they haven't. Who would leave that way? You take everything first. You get your hostages out or your Americans out. We owed it to take some of the interpreters and some of the other people out, and that's okay. And then after everything's gone, you move the military. Biden moved the military out first, and nobody was fired. Nobody, not one general lost a star. Nothing happened. It was one of the most embarrassing days, I think probably the most embarrassing day or period in the history of our country.
The core mistake of the Biden administration and the Afghanistan withdrawal is the belief that there was some government in Afghanistan capable of maintaining any order, right? We believed the lies we told ourselves. We had poured so many trillions of dollars into Afghanistan, we wanted to believe the lie that all that the taxpayer had put into that country resulted in some enduring, capable fighting force that would protect our embassy, that would process visas, that would ensure Americans were safe. The reality was, the moment we were out of there, this Ghani government was gonna fold up like a cheap suit. And so the inability to appreciate that reality directly resulted in the death of Americans who did nothing wrong. And the people who made that flawed and fatal choice, they face no consequences, no repercussions. For them, it's a bad news cycle. But for the families who lost their prized family member, it's an impact on the rest of their lives.
Because remember, none of those parts are allies. We don't have any allies. Those are all protectorates. They're protectorates, just like the British used to have. And that's because we've allowed our country to turn into exactly what the revolutionary generation warned us against, and that is an empire. Exactly what they broke away from. An empire is what we've become. And you can't see that better than what happened in Afghanistan.
In Afghanistan in particular, there was a desire to avoid embarrassment. And that desire to avoid embarrassment on the part of policymakers meant that the blood of Americans was spilling in the streets. And the poor judgment and the lack of planning, it signifies a deviation from basic competence that used to define our military.
Just ask yourself a simple question. What would this nation look like today if the $9 trillion we pissed away in Iraq and Afghanistan we had put into our country, we had put into our cities, we had put into technology, we put into education, we put into agriculture? What would this country look like with a $9 trillion investment that went through and supported basic working class folks? And what kind of productivity? The 10,000 dead. And what did they die for? The 10,000 dead. What about their productivity? What about the 50,000 that were wounded? What about the PTSD? What about the 25 veterans a day that kill themselves? What would this country be like if we hadn't done that?